Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy. I'm so excited. I actually flubbed the opening for the first time ever.
You didn't flub it, but good afternoon, guys. I'm Daniel Williams. We are excited today. This is going to be a very great show. We want to apologize. We haven't been on for Women's History Month, but we have such a great show that we are just celebrating not one, but two women at one time because Miss Edda Fields-Black is just amazing. So, Brian, I want you to go ahead and let's jump into this one.
Okay, let me do the intro. So, Dr. Edda Fields-Black is a direct descendant of a formerly enslaved man who liberated himself after the Battle of Port Royal, joined the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, the 34th Regiment, USCT, and fought in the Combee River Raid, and Africans enslaved on rice plantations in Colleton County, South Carolina. Since an early age, she's been curious about her grandparents', and she puts in quotes, peculiar speech patterns. Her mother's historical and genealogical research was her first inkling of Gullah as both a rich language and culture with its peculiar history. Her desire to reclaim her family's history and culture has taken her to the rice fields of Sierra Leone and the Republic of Guinea in West Africa, as well as South Carolina and Georgia. Fields-Black is a specialist in the transnational history of West Africa rice, peasant farmers in the pre-colonial Upper Guinea coast, and enslaved laborers on antebellum Low Country South Carolina and Georgia rice plantations. She is the author of Deep Roots, Rice Farmers in West Africa and the African Diaspora, and co-editor of Rice, Global Networks, and New Histories. She is the executive producer and librettist of Unburied, Unmourned, Unmarked, Requiem for Rice, with 3 times Emmy Award-winning classical music composer John Weinglass. Fields-Black has worked as a consultant at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the International African American Museum, and Senator John Heinz History Center. She and her family live in Pittsburgh, where she teaches history at Carnegie Mellon University and serves as director of the Dietrich College Humanities Center, and last but not least, the author of the wonderful book, Combee. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
We are very excited to have you. So excited, as I said, this is the first time I ever flubbed the intro to the show in 8 seasons. So you can take those flowers and you can take that feather.
Thank you.
There's so many things that I loved about the book, and Donnie and I had a really good conversation about it in the green room. There's way too much in it to cover in an hour, but ultimately we want people to go out and buy it because it is truly a wonderful book. But I thought I would start at just the basics. What got you interested in the story of the Combee River Raid and Harriet Tubman? What brought you to that story?
Yes, that is always the burning question. My interest in the Combee River Raid started with rice, which is what gets me interested into a lot of things. It gets me into a lot of things. I like to say that I was on the Ace Basin, in the rice fields, minding my business when I encountered this amazing story of this raid that Harriet Tubman led on these rice plantations. And the story really hadn't been told, at least not the way I thought I could tell it. And I just went in both feet first.
Literally, because I have a quick comment to make about that. But I want to call you the queen of South Carolina, right? Or the queen of rice, actually. And we really need to get you back on the show just to talk about the history of rice and the wealth that that one plant, that one crop generated. Because everyone thinks about cotton. They're sleeping on rice.
Correct.
And there's a deep history there. But Danya, you may want to put your hands over your ears or over your eyes to say that Dr. Fields-Black, she was all in on the research. And I'm going to cycle back to this later in the show. you actually, I don't want to call them reenactments, but you wanted to know what it was like to flee those plantations under the cover of darkness. Danya, she was in swampland, like, how they raise rice with gators and
Yes.
snakes and all the things you hate. She was
I know. No, this is why I wanted her to like read, because the way she did those things, when I was looking, I'm like, did she really, like, she did this stuff with, like, trying to do with no shoes at one point, and I'm like, did she do, like, she was with the alligators and the babies and the, I said, oh, that's not the move for me. Like, she really did that stuff. She drove the boat. She did the thing. She did the thing, and I'm
I
like,
did
oh,
the things.
she did the thing. Like, she did the thing.
Do you think, though, that that was one of your secret sauces in making this book so successful? Is you put yourself in the circumstances that you were writing about?
Yeah, no, I think it was critical. I wanted to put the reader as much as possible in the rice fields with the freedom seekers at 4 a.m.
Hmm.
4 a.m. when they were already in the rice fields hoeing rice, and when they first smelled, felt, and heard those steamships coming up the river, and they knew it was freedom, and they knew that freedom was finally coming for them. I wanted the reader to try to really feel that moment, to think about, try to get our heads around what people must have been thinking.
Hmm.
So in order to do that, I had to get into, and mind you, I'm always in the rice fields. I've been in the rice fields for 30 years in West Africa and in South Carolina. So when I say I was in my rice fields, I mean that literally. I was already in the rice fields and just, you know, doing research in different rice fields from Georgetown, down to the Ace Basin. The difference here was taking my shoes off.
Yeah, we're not taking shoes off over here, sis. I'm not doing that. Like, the way I'm gonna tell you, when I was watching this and I was like, she did what? And I said, oh, she wasn't playing with this one right here. Like, she
And wore a dress
the whole time.
the whole time. Now, Brian, you
Mm-mm.
can't understand.
Because when you said he had to pull you up trying to get, I said, yeah, nah, that's not gonna be me today. I was like, no, 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 no,
Don-
no.
Danya is not about that life.
I'm not about that life at all.
Not at all.
I'm not about that life at all. You talking to a person that cleans her house quarterly. Like, I walk around my house outside with the spray because I don't want nothing coming in here. So I'm not her.
Mhm.
I'm not about that life.
So,
Honey.
when you were speaking about the ooze of the mud covering your feet and the heat, the blood
Mm-mm.
of the heat of your foot, sinking into the mud.
Yes.
I'm like, it just, and the feel of the algae on your feet. I'm like, wow,
Mm-mm.
it was
Mm-mm.
visceral. It was.
Mm-mm.
But you just touched on something that I've always been curious about. And it kind of resonates with what's happening now with the 92% of Black women and the 80 to 86% of Black men. We're not being vocal in terms of being out on the streets, but we're having conversations off the grid if you want to kind of think about it. And you said something that made me think of that. How were the enslaved people, again, telling people there were no mobile phones, there were no
Right.
landlines? How were they communicating from plantation to plantation that freedom was literally on the way? The steamboats were leaving Port Royal to come up the Combee River.
Yeah. So we know that we don't know all the details, right? As you said, they didn't have any of these modern tools of communication. But we do know that there were networks. We do know that people, I'm able to show in Combee, people from different plantations on this lower Combee region went to the Praise House together. We know that their networks really cut across plantations by age. So men and women who were a certain age knew each other. How do we know they knew each other? Attended each other's weddings. They stood for each other in their weddings. They went to the praise house together when the women became pregnant. They attended, the women who were the similar age attended, their age mate. And so this is one of those places where we have to imagine that it's through these networks. We also know that men who learned a skill, learned a trade, were apprenticed together across plantations. And this one, you had younger men being apprenticed under older enslaved men. Okay. And so there's this wonderful example of Smart Washington, who was a carpenter on Newport, and Jonas Green is a cooper. And, nobody says he was my apprentice, but the way Jonas Green talks about Smart Washington, it's as if he grew up under Smart Washington's hand, is the language that the freedom seekers would use. And it's as if he grew up under his hand on the same plantation. But Smart was on Newport and Jonas was on Parker's Place, which is part of Bonnie Hall, if you will.
Mhm.
So, we see these networks within the enslaved community, and we're really seeing them for the first time. Historians of slavery have not been able to see into the slave community because they've been using what they had, which is primarily planter records. This is enslaved people in those pension files talking about their own lives, their own families, their own communities.
Mm.
There were two plantations that always gave me pause. One is Bonnie Hall, and the other was James Paul's plantation. And they gave me pause just because of where the boat stopped. And one of my favorite, well, the leading man of Combee is Mr. Minus Hamilton. And I'm sure we'll talk about him later. He was on James Paul's plantation, which is south of Longbrow, where the first boat stopped. How does an 88-year-old man get to that boat, even in a rowboat, right? There were these outliers of people who, and not everybody on James Paul's plantation escaped. But the people who did get to the boat, even get on the rowboat, and we know there were people left behind on these rowboats, were people who I'm able to document had a connection to these other plantations. Okay.
Mhm.
So we don't know how they knew, but clearly somebody like Minus Hamilton, through his daughter, who went to church, went to the praise house with people on Cyprus and went to a wedding on Cyprus of her girlfriend, and they were in the same age group.
Mhm.
Her family got on the boat. Okay. Another man who, thinking of Jackson Grant, Jackson was a coachman and he was mortgaged a number of times. You know, he wasn't a field hand. He was more, if you will, of a luxury. So if the crop wasn't looking good, they would mortgage him. And then when they got the money, they would bring him back. So he was also had spent some time on that plantation, right? And there are people who he knew as a young man who got on the boat. Everybody on that plantation didn't get on the boat. So there's a very active network.
Mm.
And I would imagine there's also some family ties there because you have big enslaving families like the Haywoods, the Middletons, and the Blakes, who are all one big extended family. Their enslaved people would have also had relations on those different plantations. And as you were saying, even the enslavers going to see their cousins, bringing their
Right.
bringing their body servants or whatever you want to call them with them.
Right.
No, I never really thought about that, but that would be another very informal way of communicating.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I also really love is Donnie was part of a book writing club about Edgefield County, South Carolina. And I remember when I was reading through the early drafts of that book, I was suggesting to everyone that they needed to make Edgefield a character. It should always be a character that was sitting in the background of that book.
Not that it needed help.
Not that it needed help. Not with Preston Brooks as its leading congressperson, but I thought you did a really amazing job actually making the Combee River a character, from the plantations that you talk about, from the enslaved people that had community. Well, I used the word community, the forced labor along that river.
Hmm.
It's very, very nuanced. And I just, do you have a personal connection to the Combee River? Because I kind of felt that you did.
I do. I do. Mm. So my father was the last of his siblings to be born in Green Pond, South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
My grandmother's family, the Frasers, the Richards, the Draytons, are from Pines Community in Green Pond, which is in Colleton County. My grandfather's family, the Fields family, was in Whitehall. And the Fields family actually came to Colleton County from Beaufort County. Um, and we really learned about the Fields family as I was writing Combee. So I do have a personal connection to the Combee, to the upper Combee, because my grandmother's family, paternal grandmother's family, was enslaved on those plantations just north of where the raid took place. So my dad is born a couple miles from the raid where the raid took place. And one of the starting points, I don't even know that I can say that, because I didn't see the connections as I was starting on what becomes Combee. I was engaged in a lot of things and I thought they were all separate. So I was writing a book that I thought was going to be about rice and the Gullah Geechee. I was working on the Requiem for Rice with John Weinglass, and I was working on the family history. And our family patriarch had left me with family business, and shortly before he passed away. So I was like, when you're at the beginning of a project, it's very messy. You're
Mhm.
just grasping at anything and throwing it against the wall and see what sticks. And it was in that process of working on the family history that I discovered, yeah, sources, the pension files that became really the backbone of Combee. And so I think there was a point at which I thought my dad's family had escaped in the raid, and that's not true. My grandmother's family was left behind.
Oh my goodness.
My grandmother's family was those Hayward plantations on the north, on the upper Combee.
Mhm.
They were evacuated after the Battle of Port Royal. And my grandfather's family, which we thought were from Whitehall, and they are, but coming to Whitehall is relatively recent. They were enslaved in Beaufort. They escaped with the Battle of Port Royal. My direct ancestor did. And so he fought in the raid.
Mm.
So the Combee is a special place to me. And it was very important to me to make the river a main character, to make the rice fields a main character. And this goes back to one of my goals, which is to put the reader in the rice fields, and really to put the reader in the river, right? As those boats are going up the river. So I had to really build out this river and these communities, black and white, that lived on it, and the people who were forced to labor on it.
So I have one last kind of contextual question for you. So you talk about or you discuss your belief that this is not only the largest U.S. slave revolt, but
Yes.
it was only second to Haiti. So that's the first part of my question. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So the largest and most successful. It, can we name another slave revolt in the US that actually succeeded, where nobody died, none of the revolutionaries died, the revolt was not betrayed, and people were actually permanently freed?
No.
No.
Now, some people argue with me because the US Army was involved, right? And so they think that because the Union Army is involved, it then doesn't count as a slave revolt. Okay, whatever.
Um, can I just quickly interject there?
Yes.
I'm sure quite a few of those planters did the U.S. The Southern claims, claiming for the loss of the human beings that they had formerly enslaved. So you can't have it both ways.
That part.
This is true. This is true. And that's another important source in Combee is I think it was 4 of those planters whose plantations were destroyed and their enslaved labor forces liberated themselves, filed for compensation, and they named the people they lost, right? And they put a price tag on them.
And they were paid for them.
Well, they they did not get paid.
They
They
did.
did not get paid after the war because they were okay. So there's 2 forms of compensation. There's the Southern Claims Commission, which is going to the U.S., and then there's the Confederate. I'm forgetting what they called it.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
I'll find it. They filed to the Confederate government. They didn't get paid because, of course, the Confederacy was insolvent, right?
True.
But they left the records. And there's one planter, Joshua Nichols, who was a double dipper. He applied to the Union and the Confederacy. He didn't get paid, but his daughters got paid on his behalf after his death in the 1930s by an act of Congress.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we just had our first jaw-dropping
Note to self.
So my second
reparations can happen.
I was going to say, talk about reparations.
Hey,
right?
Note to self, reparations can happen too. Yeah, that part.
Yep.
Well, yeah, that always happened. It even happened for planters who lost enslaved people in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. They got recompensed. Our descendants of enslaved people never have been.
No, but what I'm saying is, Brian, is that, one of their main things is that they say as far as reparations is concerned is that there are no enslaved people around now. So who are they paying the money to? So if they were able to receive that money, even though this man had died, he was not here. So why is he able to receive it? Why are they able to receive it? He was not here.
And the descendants of the enslaved are not able to receive it.
Right, but I can't receive it because I know that my great-great-grandmama was enslaved. I have proof of it. I see her. I got my DNA. Everything about it is all there. So I should be able to receive monies, from the government stating, I should be able to get reparations. And they did in 1930. So, okay.
That's not how this country's built. Reparations was not made for us like everything else. So
I was just watching West Wing. Okay, I'm going to let that go.
The second part of my question is more about the Gullah Geechee themselves. We know how the Western world feels about Haiti, how the non-Black Western world feels about Haiti. Another, a whole country that successfully threw out the French, gained their freedom, and have had a horrible reputation ever since then. Do you
Hmm.
think that this is one of the reasons why the Gullah Geechee are spoken of so poorly? Because they did a good number of them liberated themselves.
That's an interesting question. I think, I actually think that the connection between the Gullah Geechee and rice, and the connection between the Gullah Geechee and the Combee River raid, I think it's kind of recent. Um, and I'm not sure that I think most people still associate the Gullah Geechee with the Sea Islands and not think about the broad and diverse, diversity of the Low Country, because the Low Country is not only, it's the coast, but it's not only the island side, it's also the coastal interior.
Hmm.
Um, I think why people have thought poorly of the Gullah Geechee, a lot of it goes back to language. A lot of it goes back to somebody like, mm, dare I say it, Ambrose Gonzalez, talking about formerly enslaved peoples as if their tongues and their mouths couldn't pronounce standard English. I mean, it goes back to some really racist post slavery, early 20th century stuff that still gets recycled. And much of that stuff was written by, former enslavers. Um, I think that's why the Gullah Geechee are still maligned many times.
Well, I want to go into more deeper into the book. Can you read a little from the book?
I can. I have chosen a passage which is a slightly different than what I usually read, but it's still about Minus Hamilton because I want to contextualize Mr. Hamilton a little bit. It's from chapter 14, which is the chapter title is Day Clean. Unlike Joshua Nichols, Minus Hamilton could not write a letter to a friend, let alone have it subsequently published in the newspaper as a letter to the editor. Nor could he write an official military report like Colonel William C. Hayward. What the very aged man could do was recollect what he saw with his own eyes and experienced on the plantation where he was held in bondage when the Union Army drove its two retrofitted gunboats up the Combee River. Like Harriet Tubman, the overwhelming majority of soldiers in the 1st and 2nd South Carolina Volunteers and those people enslaved on the Combee rice plantations, Hamilton was illiterate. However, Hamilton did tell his story to Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, whom Higginson identified as Minus Hamilton, aged 28, one of those who came down on Montgomery's Combahee, and that's a misspelling, raid. He recorded Hamilton's life story in his war journal while Hamilton was standing at the door of his tent a little more than a month after the Combee River raid and after the 1st South Carolina Volunteers returned to camp from an expedition up the Edisto River. Higginson took pains not only to record the man's story, but also to capture his dialect, because, as he later wrote in his memoir, he wanted to paint the scene of freedom seekers' birthdays of freedom from the point of view of from the slaves themselves. Higginson understood what a rare privilege it was to view the raid through the eyes of an enslaved person who secured liberation from bondage as a result of it. At 88, Minus Hamilton was likely the oldest of the bondspeople on record as having escaped the prison house of bondage in the raid. I will let Mr. Hamilton tell his story. The people was all a hoeing, massa. They was a hoeing in the rice field when the gunboats come. Den every man drap dem hoe and left de rice. De massa he stand and call, run to the wood for hide. Yankee come, sell you to Cuba, run for hide. Every man he run, and my God, run all the other way. Massa stand in the wood, peep, peep, fade for trust. He say, run to the wood, and every man run by him, straight to the boat. An hour or two before day clean as dawn is called, Hamilton was among the enslaved people laboring in the tidal rice fields on James L. Paul's Combee rice plantation, where, as we've seen, he and his family were sold in December 1959. Paul's place was the first rice plantation that Montgomery and his men encountered on the east side as they steamed up the river into Colleton. Minus Hamilton could have been one of the, quote, woolly heads at work, unquote, in the rice fields that Apthorpe observed. Every person forced to labor in the rice fields dropped their long-handled hoe with the angled blade and left the rice in the fields. The overseer, whom Hamilton called Massa, the formerly enslaved man appears to have called every white man Massa, including Higginson, did much what Joshua Nichols did. He stood in the rice field and called the enslaved field hands working there to run and hide in the woods. The Yankees had finally come and would sell them all to Cuba. Hamilton and his fellow bondspeople were not fooled. They did not feign attachment to the enslaver nor obedience to the overseer, despite Joshua Nichols' later insistence. They also did the opposite of what they were ordered to do. The overseer, like Joshua Nichols, ran into the woods. From his forested hiding place, he looked back at the enslaved people, then looked again. He told the enslaved people one last time to run to the woods and hide. They ignored him utterly. They ran for their lives to freedom, straight to the boat.
Wow.
Which kind of tells me a thing or two about the enslaver. You're going to run through alligators and snakes and God only knows what to get away from him.
Yes, to get to freedom. Absolutely.
Yeah, they didn't really care. So the thing is that the one of the things that I really liked about that passage, because you actually read that passage in one of your online videos that I saw,
Mm-hmm.
and they paid him absolutely no mind. Like they were like, "Nah, Slim, we not doing this today. I'm going in this direction." I
Yep.
think I'm saying it in like this because did you know that they also did this? And they know me on our show. I'm the one that says crazy stuff. So I also saw that they did this a version of this on Comedy Central, the drunken version.
Hmm.
The girl told the story same way, but of course she was drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And she was telling the story. She read this version, your version, but she
Mm-hmm.
did it in this way. And she was like, nah, I ain't doing that. I'm going this way. So she did it the same way. And she was like, I'm not going to stay here with you. You lost your mind, but she went through the whole thing. And I was like, yeah, that's it. But it was a way for people to understand it better because it was, spoken in that just that regular that regular
Yeah.
talk, that regular speech, that regular speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm not staying there. I'm not gonna stay here with you when I know I can go in this direction. And then I started seeing the way it was written, the way when you were reading it. And then the photos that were the illustrations that were done, I mean, they show people diving into the water and
Mm-hmm.
jumping. It
Yep.
was so well done. And then I did not even realize that this same scene was also done in the movie Harriet. I didn't know that.
It is one of the last scenes in the movie
Yes.
Harriet. Yes,
I
it
and
is.
I didn't know that. And I'm like, I couldn't believe that this is not done. So I say all this to say your video, when you talk about the book, you talk about introducing the book, you say that it's a almost like it's a hidden chapter of Harriet Tubman.
Mhm.
Why do you call it a hidden chapter when so many different people talk about this? It's been in the movie and things. What makes you see it as a hidden chapter?
Yeah. It's hidden because we know so much about Harriet Tubman's sacrifices on the Underground Railroad. And, she led such a legendary life that has been studied by so many. And if I should back up when I say that, because of course, much of what had been written about Tubman was written in children's books,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mhm.
so we're going back a few decades, but in that few decades, there's been this just explosion of research on Harriet Tubman's life. As I thought about, could I write a book about the Combee River Raid? One of my questions was, is there anything new to say about Harriet Tubman? And as I dug into the literature, it became clear that her Civil War service was the least known chapter of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been dismissed by Civil War historians. Um, she talks about it, right? She talked about it for the rest of her life. It's in her autobiography. It's She talks about it in many interviews that she did about the Combee River Raid and what she did on the Combee River Raid. But it was utterly dismissed in the Civil War literature because I have my theories.
I do
Um,
too.
So
Most
do
people
I.
think it's because she was a Black woman. I think, yes, okay, but I think it goes beyond that.
I do too.
Um, the Union official. Okay, the big reason is because it's not a part of the official military record. She's not written about in the official military record. And the Union official military record, it's full of descriptions of the Black spies, scouts, and pilots on whom the Union depended to get its information. People who knew the plantations, they knew the landscape, they knew the rivers, etc. These people were men, right? They were men. I have not come across, and I haven't come across a Civil War historian who has come across a woman who was named in the official Union record as giving intelligence to the Union. When they're named by first names, and I do a lot in Combee with names. And then the last name is the enslaver, it's the planner, right? So we encountered Bob on Colonel Beauregard's plantation, right? And Bob took us up this river. What was Bob's name? We don't know beyond Bob. Could have been 5 Bobs on that plantation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's number one. Number two is that when it comes to the Combee River Raid, the official military record is 100% Confederate. 100%. And it's page after page of reports from Confederate commanders, officers, and soldiers covering themselves. And what were their orders? What was their location? What was their movement? And whose fault it was that they were not doing something else, because it was not their fault, right? It's a lot of scapegoating. They had to explain themselves. They had to explain themselves, and there was disciplinary action taken against some, mainly soldiers, but a few lower level commanders. So the fact that Harriet Tubman's not mentioned is not unusual because there's no Union of reports in the official military record. Colonel James Montgomery, who led the raid, um, his one paragraph report is not a part of the official military record. It's found
Wow.
elsewhere. So I'm very proud. Combee just won the 2025 Gilder Lehrman institute Lincoln Prize for the best book
Wow.
about the
Congratulations.
Civil War.
Congratulations.
Thank you. They
Wow.
can't deny Harriet Tubman Civil War service anymore.
No.
Mhm.
They
Well,
can't.
my thought process, I think, is because personally, I feel like she should be given. I know that they say that she only freed like 70 people, and those were family and friends. But I think that they should include these folks as a part of
Mhm,
the people that she freed. And to be
mhm.
able to give her that number of people
Right,
is a problem.
right.
I
It,
think that be giving black people our just in during that time is a problem
Hmm.
anyway. I think that
And
that's
during this time too.
well, yeah, yeah, but especially during that time
Yeah.
because, and I say it like that because we only began to exist during civil rights. As far
Hmm.
as history and how we are taught, we only began to exist during civil rights. We became good Christian folks during civil rights.
Right.
Anything before then, we were enslaved, and that was it. They don't
Hmm.
teach Reconstruction. They don't teach any of those things. We didn't do well. We didn't do anything. We didn't
Right.
exist. You guys, we just became civil during 1964. So,
Hmm.
if anything, if we did anything, if we succeeded in anything, if we were able to do or what have you, it didn't happen until 1964.
That's interesting.
And I think that giving her that just during that time and giving us any kind of just during that time makes people of all colors realize that we actually were very instrumental in what was going on
Hmm.
as far as the reconstruction of America. And I think
Hmm.
that's why that's my personal as to why they won't give it to her, because she freed those folks.
She did.
She's
And
the
you know,
reason.
for the people who say just 70 people,
Yeah.
she went back into it's like putting your hand
Mm-hmm.
in the lion's mouth
Mm-hmm.
after you've already gotten out. You got out,
That's
and
right.
she went back in 13 times.
That's right.
And that's not to say that there are not other people who went back, who liberated themselves and went back for family members.
That's
yeah,
But
right.
we don't know
13
who else. We
times?
don't know who else she inspired.
Right.
Exactly.
And we don't,
Exactly.
a lot of those folks, we don't know their names. We know some names. She
Yes.
went back 13 times.
Exactly.
I feel confident in saying that even people who did go back didn't go back 13 times. And there are plenty of abolitionists. Frederick Douglass is one. I
Yes.
talk about no other of these, big name abolitionists that are talked about ever, those who were formerly enslaved, to actually go
Go
back
back.
and to go back multiple times
That's right.
and then to go to South Carolina, which, since this is where the first shots of the Civil War are fired, was the belly of the beast.
That part.
To go into the belly of the beast
That
to
part.
help people she didn't even know.
That part. Because she was ready. She was ready and able and willing. She did so much. So to add more to what she already did, I think they was like, you know what? Her
We're not doing
70,
it.
that 13, we're gonna give her that, and we ain't giving her no more. That's my thought process.
Because I'm going to say this. Edith, you in your book, you've kind of made Donnie and I do a U-turn because every Women's History Month and Black History Month, we've always said we weren't going to do Harriet Tubman because
Oh yeah.
everything that could be said about her had been said. But your book blew that out of the water. So here we are, spending this hour. This is more of an observation. I'd like both of you to input on this one. No one really talks. I get the sense that Harriet Tubman had what we would call high emotional intelligence. She did not come from this part of the South.
Hmm.
So this was a new group of people for her, a new culture for her. Everything was kind of against her. Then she was dealing with both black and white, well, primarily black pilots and spies and scouts, but there were white regiments. And no
Right.
one seemed to doubt her authority or her leadership.
Mm-hmm.
when it came to this. And I'm just wondering if maybe factored in, she knew how to keep it down low with the white folk, with the white generals and the officers, to not be perceived as a threat. Because we know that Black women, for whatever reason, kind of have that aura attached to them wrongly, but that's usually the thing that gets attached. So she knew to kind of maybe keep it on the back pedal with the white officers, but she certainly knew how to step up and lead when she had to. Because again, this book was really making me think about her in the guise of being a military leader. Which, Donnie, correct me, I hadn't really read anything that had given her that props or those flowers, but apparently other people have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
So,
think, Brian, I think for me, because I think Dr. Etta did it when she talked about her and making the comparison in one of the videos that I watched, how someone tried to say she knew the landscape of South Carolina when she did not.
Right.
She couldn't. Um, the fact that they tried to make the comparison of both of them being like a marsh type place, that this is why she would know the landscape, when that's just impossible. Maryland and South Carolina is two totally different places, and she would
mhm,
not know those areas. So I think that for that, as far as that is concerned, number one, she had to have some type of trust with the enslaved people. I first think that that's where her first set of trust came in at, letting them know, hey, I'm here to help y'all. And
Mm-hmm.
because she was who she was, and everybody knew who she was, regardless of anything, they knew who she was. The enslaved folks was like, yeah, she gonna get me to where I need to be, so I'm gonna trust this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the white soldiers, if they were truly who they were about, about this whole reform of freeing African Americans, or whatever they called them at that time, Negroes, or whatever they called them at that time, they were going to trust who she was because of the people that they were involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they weren't involved with people like Preston. They were they were involved with other folks. They were the abolitionists of that time. So they just believed in, okay, y'all trust her, so I'm a trust her. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the guidance that they went. These people literally, they knew the line that they were going to be on, and this was the line that they were on. They were on this side of the line, and you had those on the opposite side of the line.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you can't. It's not like that. We don't know what line they on unless they're people like what's his face that was on last week. We know what side of the line he's on.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I mean. It just, to me, I think it just depends. Back then you knew where they were, you knew where they stood, and you knew how they felt. Point
Mm-hmm.
blank. Nowadays you can't trust it.
I would add to that Tubman was a really important part of abolitionist networks
Yes.
from the time she freed herself in 1849 up until the Civil War. She's living in Philadelphia. She spends time in Massachusetts, upstate New York, and Canada. And she's working there. She's organizing there in these places. She's fundraising. She's speaking. She was very well known among abolitionist communities. And from those bases, she would go back and do her rescue missions. So she's extremely well respected. And I'm able to show in Combee that there are people who knew Tubman very, very well, who supported her in that decade, more than decade. There
Mm-hmm.
were kids who grew up with her, Aunt Harriet, basically,
Mm-hmm.
who then come down to Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands. Um, and there's a whole there's kind of this split in the abolitionist community whether or not we need to be using violence, right, to free slaves, or nonviolent. So the whole wing that was all about violence, and they're in Kansas after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and Colonel James Montgomery, who was leading a regiment and violently confronting these people who are trying to extend slavery into Kansas. He's the commander of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers. Thomas Wentworth Higginson is the commander, the colonel of the 1st 2nd South Carolina Volunteers. He's in Kansas also. He's not fighting, but he's there. You look at the general, Brigadier General David Hunter is from Kansas. So this whole Kansas wing, right? People who were taking up arms or willing to take up arms, they are with Tubman planning the Combee River Raid. And there's this wonderful description of David Hunter, General David Hunter, pouring water. He's got a towel over his hand and a pitcher in the other hand, and he is pouring Harriet Tubman's water. It's a white man pouring water for a Black woman. He's serving her. So just very, very deep respect. And the U.S. Army, they had a trust problem. The federal government had a trust problem. They had a problem in the Sea Islands. They had a problem in Beaufort and Port Royal. And the problem, and I go, to great lengths in Combahee about it. They weren't paying people who were working for the federal government. There are these moments when people are not getting paid. And so are they being forced to labor again now by the federal government? So what they did, one of the things they did is to sort of highlight and take around people who, were abolitionists, well-known abolitionists, to try to get people. And Tubman was one of those people. It's like, this is Moses, and she's with us. So you can trust us because she trusts us. There was another slaveholder from Beaufort who sold his enslaved people, bought them back, freed them, and took them up to Cleveland. He was a pastor. Why am I forgetting his name? I'll come up with it. And so he was also one of these people, right? They would say, well, Reverend so-and-so is with us, right? So you can trust us because you know him. You don't know us, but you know him. You know Moses. She's with us. So I think that's how trust was built. I think that's
amazing.
How trust was built.
Well, I'm going to give her another flower. Sounds like she was an exceedingly excellent diplomat.
Yes.
Yes.
It does. Yes. And that emotional intelligence, being able to read people and being able to identify what motivates people, right? And being able to get people to confide in her, these formerly enslaved people who were coming from territory that's, abuts where the Union has occupied, but they're still in bondage. So if they can get to Beaufort, if they can get to the Sea Islands, then who do they trust? They trust Moses, right?
Yes.
And they tell her what they saw, because these are people who are forced to build fortifications for the Confederacy. They're cooking, they're cleaning, they're serving the soldiers. They're still working. And they know where everything is.
Yes.
They know the troops' strength, they know the numbers, they know the armaments and their locations. They know everything. And so that's the kind of intelligence that the Union needs, and that Tubman's able to get from them and then give to the military commanders.
That's amazing. Well, I am definitely ordering the book, and I just want to thank you again for being on the show. Again, guys, the name of the book is Combee, Harriet Tubman, how do you pronounce that word?
Combee.
Oh, okay. Combee and Black freedom during the Civil War, and I did a short link so you guys can definitely click on it and get it. Please don't hang up from here, but I want to thank you again, Dr. Fields-Black, for just being on the show. And we definitely want to talk to you about coming on for rice, because you got me interested on this whole thing with the rice stuff. But again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for me as well. And as always, thank you to everyone who, no matter how you're tuning in, has enjoyed this hour, or hopefully enjoyed this hour right along with us.
Yeah.
And as we promised, every show that we've had lately, there has been one of those legit jaw-dropping moments, and we gave you one.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Remember that. Check it off.
So we will see you here next week, next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and all the usual places that you tune in. Again, thank you very much for spending your Sunday with us.